There are so many ways to communicate. On this channel, I normally talk about face-to-face communication, but no form of communication moves me more than music and songs. And in today's video, I have the great privilege and opportunity of interviewing one of my favorite songwriters, the great American songwriter, singer, and guitar player, Robbie Fulks. It's quite a long interview. It runs about 2 hours. At the very end of the interview, there's an opportunity to see Robbie perform one of his songs, Old Glories. If you don't want to sit through the whole 2 hours, you can watch it in parts, or you could listen to it as just kind of a podcast, because visually there's not much going on. It's just me and Robbie talking. I really hope you enjoy this conversation about songwriting between me and Robbie Fulks. Hi everybody, this is Bruce Lambert from How Communication Works. This is a channel where I teach you about communication skills so you can improve your relationships, succeed at work, be more confident, and lead a more fulfilling life. And really nothing allows me to lead a more fulfilling life than being able to listen to the music that I love. And these days there's really few artists that I enjoy listening to more than the person I'm going to interview today, the singer and songwriter, Robbie Fulks. Well, it's my pleasure today to talk with singer, songwriter, essayist, guitar player, Robbie Fulks. Robbie is someone who I've known of for many, many years and have known a little bit personally for several years. Robbie lived and worked in Chicago for many years, something like 40 years, I think, until he recently relocated to California. And, you know, this is a channel about communication. And one of the forms of communication that's actually nearest and dearest to my heart and communicates most directly with me is songs and songwriting. And I regard Robbie as a master of the craft. So as I was on one of my evening walks during the pandemic, I've been listening to Robbie's outstanding album, Upland Stories, over and over again. And I just thought to myself, I'd really like to talk to Robbie about songwriting, about how he manages to communicate so effectively with words and music. So it's my pleasure, Robbie, to talk to you. You know, I'm a big fan. It's such an honor and pleasure to be able to talk with you about your music.
Well, the honor's all mine. Thanks for including me in a different kind of a platform and a context than I'm usually accustomed to.
Yeah, sure. My pleasure. There's so much I want to ask you about because you've been creative in so many different ways. As you know, I've commented before on Twitter and elsewhere about how much I appreciate your essays and how fine an essayist I think you are. And I've tried to encourage you to write a book of these essays, and that's one of the things I'll ask about later. But primarily you're known as a songwriter, as a singer and a guitar player. So I guess my first question is, why the song as an art form? Rather than something like the essay or a poem or a novel or any other medium that you might have chosen?
Well, I guess part of the answer is that, the answer to a lot of questions about music, I find, is that it's not really a decision. It's not felt as a decision. And another way, a similar way of answering is just that, you take stock of what you can do, what your skills are, not only what you enjoy the most, but what you think just you're most skilled at. And for me, that seems to intersect more at music than at prose. I just think they're, at this point, when I've been doing it this long, that's also a big part of it. Like I have so much experience behind me in the one area as opposed to the other. And while there are, dozens and probably hundreds of prose writers that I admire and love reading, I don't come to it quite in the same way as musicians. And to put it in a just egoistic way, I seem to come at musicians at this point as peers, and I'm interested in a lot of what they do and admire, many of them, but not in the same distanced, not totally comprehending way that I would approach, a prose writer.
That's interesting. So the prose writers who you admire would seem more mysterious to you, or
right.
That's interesting. Even though at least the essay you seem to have mastered to a fairly high level. Is your self-evaluation that your songwriting is just far and away better than your essay writing?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like in essays, if it's something, if I'm writing something I'm really interested in and know something about, which, in the last couple essays I've written, one's been about Gordon Lightfoot and one's
Yeah.
about the writer Adam Schlesinger from Fountains of Wayne. And so a subject like that I'm thoroughly immersed in, I'm interested enough to do a lot more research and to really look hard at each sentence and try to make some kind of music out of the sentences.
Yeah.
The essay. If the subject were different, if the subject were refrigeration trucks or, 18th century shipping,
Yeah.
I don't know if I could bring the same. I feel like a talented songwriter could a writer could address a wide array of subject matter. But as a songwriter, I do address kind of a wide array of styles and subjects, and I think that's because I'm just more of a songwriter than an essayist.
Yeah. So, I have one question which could sort of derail a bunch of my other questions. So I hope the answer is yes. And that's sort of, how do you feel about talking about the meaning of your songs? I know some songwriters, they want to say, even, some artists, filmmakers, sculptors, whatever, they sort of say, well, it's all there in the art. And then they don't want to say much about it. I wonder where you come down on that.
Yeah, I think, my experience writing the things is that almost always that I have something pretty concrete in mind, or it comes to mind more as the writing goes on. Often in the first couple of lines, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And then halfway through, I'll definitely know what I'm doing. I'll sort of have to know things like, where in the world is the story taking place?
Yeah.
And, even if it's in my mind, what is the landscape there? And then by the time it's finished and it's like on a record, I feel like somebody else can bring his own interpretation to it, or her own interpretation, and that I should be respectful of that, because I feel like once it's out in the world, it's even though it's a fixed thing, it's communicating in real time with other people, and if other people attach meanings to it, then that's something that can be kind of sacred. If your song helps somebody get through a rough patch or just lifts him, as he listens to it, then who are you to say, the guy that wrote it, that no, it doesn't mean that? What are you talking about?
Yeah. It's really interesting. In communication, one of the things I talk about on the channel a lot is sort of, if you think about everyday communication, sort of with functional goals to comfort someone or to persuade someone or to instruct someone or something like that, there's often, it's a lot about the communicator's intention and then being able to convey this, and then the other person being able to make the correct inferences about the communicator's intention. So a lot of everyday sort of face-to-face conversation, for example, is about clearly conveying your intentions. And it's interesting for me to hear you say you have a fairly clear intention when you're composing. Do you think about an effect in the listener that you're trying to produce, or not? An emotional effect, any other kind? Are you thinking in those terms at all, or is it coming from just a purely expressive?
Yeah, I think I am thinking about effects, but you're never sure. The audience is kind of ultimately yourself when you're alone in a room writing a song, and the audience that you're imagining. I don't have a large audience, so which in a way is liberating. But I think of, I guess I'm thinking of a sort of average listener, or maybe above average listener, in terms of receptivity and intelligence and openness, and at some level in there's this idea that people along a normal range on a bell curve react to stimuli in a similar way. Also, I think that's connected to the idea that humans are kind of similar, and we all go through, as wide as our different experiences are, they're not really as wide as we think. So to sing about, the point of my point of view, which is cloistered, a 57-year-old guy living in California, pretty privileged person who was brought up in Virginia, North Carolina, all these things I'm very, I don't think about twice about including those narrow points of view in my song.
Those are there in many of the songs.
I'm sorry?
Those are there. I mean, those points of view I recognize, for many of your songs. Those themes.
Those are there, but I think apart from those, those name specified details, the specifics are specific, but I think we're kind of all going through a similar story as humans.
Yeah. So love and loss and joy and lust and despair, whatever the common themes in your music.
Continual disappointment, the search for meaning, raising children, taking on responsibilities, owning real estate, a fear of death. I mean, that list is probably 50 items long.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. I've just been listening to an audiobook by there's a psychiatrist. I don't know if you've ever read his novels. His name is Irving Yalom. He writes novels and he also writes books about therapy. He's a really interesting character. And he's just written a memoir. He's about 85 and he's just written a memoir, but he's famous for founding a school of therapy called existential psychotherapy, which is really says in psychotherapy, mostly people are bringing 4 or 5 core issues: the search for meaning, the fear of death, isolation, etc. And then I thought about your music and I thought, there's a lot of these existential themes, especially in Upland Stories, which is the record I've been listening to over and over, and the one I'll probably make most reference to in my questions.
So what's that writer's name, the last name?
Yeah, Yalom, Yalom. His first name, Irvin, Irvin. And his memoir is great, but if you don't know his other work, it might not be the place to start. He's written several novels. If you just check him out on Amazon, you'll find his stuff. It's really interesting. So, you're such a fine songwriter. The craft of the songs is so amazing. I'm curious. I have many questions about your process, but one of the first is, how carefully do you think about perspective, meter, et cetera, in advance? Or do these things come more organically? Are you thinking, this is going to be in 3/4 time and it's going to be the first person and so on? Or are those, what can you say about how that evolves? I'm sure there's not a single answer that applies to every song.
Well, it occurs to me to kind of, could I illustrate on the guitar? Because I've got
absolutely. That would be great.
It'll take me 30 seconds.
Sure. So are you still playing that Collings D1 a couple of years ago? Is that still the one, or what is that you're playing most of the time?
At D2H, and I've had it for like seven or 8 years now. Yeah, it's usually my first go-to, although I got a newer Martin a couple of years ago that I take out sometimes too. So you said perspective and meter just as examples of, I guess, components of a song.
Yeah, and so like, how calculating are you is my question, and how much does it just evolve? That the story tells itself in the second person or something?
Yeah, the short answer is not very, or hardly at all. But the more, maybe the more illustrative answer, like I was working on a song this morning where I was goofing around with and then I goofed around changing the chords, changing the and then I was thinking about the chorus, about doubling the time of the chord changes. And of course, changing the phrase lengths as well. Yeah. And I don't want to include the lyrics that I was goofing with.
No, that's fine.
Banal. But the point of that is that that's a pretty representative thing of what happens when I write a song. The more songs I've written, the more I've become convinced that the feeling the music and the color of the chords and the rhythmic values of the song and the tempo and all these things, the emotional color kind of precede the words. And so I usually try to, ideally something comes together at once, a lyrical phrase and it'll come, with a melody and over some chord changes. Yeah. But when it doesn't, or when that's just your brief window in and you've got the other 95% of the song to still write, I'll just be thinking about things like groove and color and chords before I'll start thinking about perspectives and storylines usually.
That's interesting. That was one of my questions. And it's kind of a, song nerd question to kind of ask, what comes first, the words or the music, but you just sort of answered it. There's this picture of, did you ever read that book, Songwriters on Songwriting? That set of, you probably have. It's like all these.
Dalo, is that the guy?
Yeah. Yeah. There's like a second edition. It's all these interviews with all these songwriters. And in the one with Paul Simon, who I know is a songwriter you admire, I think most of the time the music comes first, and he says he sits there with the baseball, and throws it against the wall and waits for the words to come to him as he listens to the music. It's interesting.
To the baseball because of the rhythm or because of the physical release?
He just needs something to do, like a bodily distraction, to maybe let the unconscious flow more easily.
That makes sense. I mean, I pace, I try not to sit down when I'm doing it too much. So yeah, the physical being loose I think has been important to me. And as far as the music preceding the words, no matter what you think about it, at some point in the song, you're faced with, like you've written a verse, right? Yeah. And you've got one or two more presumably to write. So usually, or almost always at some point, you have chunks of musical form that you're trying to fill words into.
Yes.
Just because of the nature of the thing, and comparatively seldom the other way around. And I've tried to experimentally to work more the other way around, where I'll write down words that I like and try to musicalize them, and it's just much less successful for me.
That's interesting. Yeah, I find that when I'm writing, either when I'm trying to write poetry or song lyrics or even prose, constraint is actually very useful for me. So sure. Like, that having a rhyme scheme or a meter, somehow I can search my mind for words more easily if they have to fit into a meter or if they have to.
Exactly. Yeah. It's the same thing. And with regard to rhyme, it's like, that's maybe the most, the easiest way to see what we're talking about, because when you have a word that needs to be rhymed, then you have a very finite set, sometimes as few as 3 words or something that will work.
And so
that guides meaning in a useful way, and then sometimes a surprising way to the writer.
It really is interesting, that process of, you need a rhyme, and sometimes, I don't know, do you resort to a rhyming dictionary at times?
I use rhyming dictionaries all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and in some ways, maybe it seems like a crutch, but I don't find it, because you still have to pick sometimes there's a very small set, but you still have to pick one, and then there'll be a word occasionally where it's like, wow, that I didn't think of that at all, in terms of the possibilities it opens up.
Yeah, and and also sometimes rhyming dictionaries don't have the full set. Sometimes you can come up with a clever addition to what they have, and oddly, sometimes they miss some obvious choices too. And then, of course, when you're getting into near rhymes, I don't think there's such a thing. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think there's a near rhyming dictionary out there.
I think there's some like AI-based and computer-based things now, automated generating of rhymes, and you can get clearer to the, not a pure rhyme. But I think you're right.
I wonder if your own brain wouldn't be. I don't know how advanced the AI things are, but I kind of suspect that my own brain would be as handy a device as the time that it took to read through a computer-generated list of near rhymes.
Yeah.
But this morning, just to take that out a little farther, this morning I came up. I was thinking of a hook where the end of the phrase would be the word "with," which would be a fun way to go. And I started thinking, well, Smith. somehow you could justify a character called Smith.
Yeah.
And then I thought of maybe he's not a neolith, and maybe we're living inside of a Greek myth. And there are all sorts of ways. So these unusual rhyming words that we seem to have very few plausible rhyming pairs are for me super fun. I think for a lot of songwriters, it puts a little more fun in the game.
Yeah,
the rhyming do and you over and over and over again.
Right. I mean, later on, I have these questions about reacting to different songwriters, and I remember, and John, I was going to ask you about John Prine. I don't know whether you encountered Prine in all your years in Chicago. I figured you might have at the Old Town School or something. But there's an interview with Prine a long time ago where in that album, The Missing Years, which he made in the early 90s, there's a song where he says he'd been waiting his entire life to, that I guess he and his mother, some used to say exactlioto Quasimodo. And he found a rhyme for Quasimodo and he got it into a song eventually. It took him 25 years to do so.
Awesome.
The interesting thing, the reason I asked, like, how calculating are you in your composition is because when I read your essays about music, like when I read I read just recently in preparation for this, your essay about Johnny Cash and the American song series, and then the essay about Gordon Lightfoot, both of which I'll link to in the description below the video, and I highly recommend to people. But you obviously have a mastery of like poetic forms and stuff like that, and of literary devices. Like you know the names of all of them. I presume that it's something that you've studied. Is that a correct assumption?
I took a class in college in rhetoric, and the teacher was the greatest teacher I ever had. His name was Ray Bird. In fact, I was just emailing him not so long ago. He's retired and living in Italy, but he was really inspiring to me. And for whatever reason, the sort of mathematical approach to writing, where you learn the names of the rhetorical devices, I just loved learning these weird names that nobody knows, as well as being inspired by the idea that there are reliable go-to effects that good writers use. Really demystified it more for me. Of course, you can make it so demystified that you become a hack.
Yes.
Something to look out for. But yeah, instead of the word pun, use the word paranomasia, and learning what, and then on a much more useful and simple level, learning what an enjambment is. But when it comes to like words that describe, repeating a succession of phrases in which the first word is always the same, or a succession where the last word of the phrase is the same as the first word of the next phrase. I'm always forgetting those words and always enjoying looking up and reminding myself what those words are.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't call that a mastery, but an interest. Yeah.
Sure. So I mean, obvious rhetorical device. It's the songwriters and poets use, simile and metaphor, and you use a lot of beautiful similes and metaphors in your songs. It occurred to me, do some of these songs originate in just a great metaphor or a great simile? I mean, a couple that struck me from Upland Stories were, I think, in South Bend Lingers On. It's the hearts they drag behind them like long black bridal trains, or even just in Sweet as Sweet Comes, sweet as the laurels. I just thought that's such a beautiful simile. Of all the things I might think are sweet, the laurels would never occur to me. So do these metaphors come early in the process to you, or do you have a practice of generating them, or what can you say about them, either the similes or the metaphors?
Well, I don't have a real clear memory of, how I came up with either of those lines. And I do remember, South Bend, was an example of right behind them, like long black bridal trains.
Yeah.
I think it took some messing around with phrases and probably a number of days before I was able to compress these various ideas. Sometimes you have ideas that don't seem to link together in a very efficient, economical way. And so you have the idea of like gloomy women walking around the town because their husbands have been killed in in Iraq the year before.
Yeah.
And they're young women. And then you get the idea of The Bride Wore Black, like that movie, The Bride Wore Black. And then you think of your heart dragging behind you like a bridal train. And then you try to put them all together into the length of the line, which is however many number of syllables that is. So that didn't come easy for me, but I guess that, and maybe it doesn't answer your question, but that metaphor and the conciseness of it came together with work and with time and with just kind of goofing around with moving words around within phrases. And the laurel is an example of a thing like sweet as the laurel. Yeah. You look at it on the page and you go, I don't know if I can get away with that one or not.
That's amazing. In the song, it just works absolutely perfectly. I mean, so I interrupted with praise. I apologize. So it's,
I'm just going to say I get more confident about using weird lines like that, weird metaphors and images as I get older. And if I came with sweet as the laurel 15 or 20 years ago, I would have struck it. It would have been a first draft line. But now I'll think, no, it sings pretty well. And I think it means something solid. And I don't remember hearing that before in a song. And all of those things, give me more confidence about using it.
Well, both. For people who don't know this song, there's a song called Sweet as Sweet Comes, which is just an astoundingly great song. And I want to ask stylistically about that song too, because I think it's a departure from all the other songs on that record in its style. But the line is sweet as talking about a woman, right? Sweet as the laurel. And then the next line is sweet as sugarcane rum, which is another thing that it's a more conventional sweet thing, right? Sugarcane is obviously sweet, but sugarcane rum is not. So, I mean, I sit out like I'd be walking through the dark and listening to this music, and those lines just absolutely slay me.
The internet is helpful nowadays. If you come up with a line, I don't know, there are a lot of examples where that, like, but sugarcane rum would be one, where you think to yourself, wait a minute, now what is that exactly?
Stealing that, yeah.
So you just Google it, Yeah. And so a lot of times I'll Google, and if it's never come up in language, that's a danger thing. But if it's come up, 20 times on the whole of the internet, then it's probably a good thing, like it exists, but it's underused. So,
Gillian Welch, who I'm a huge fan of as a songwriter, and with whom I put you in my pantheon of songwriters who are still working. She writes a song about having a dark turn of mind. I don't know if you know that song.
Which song is it?
Oh, I wish I could remember it. I'll have to Google it myself. It's on her most recent, The Harrow and the Harvest. So, but the chorus talks about how she's a person with a dark turn of mind. And I saw her interviewed about this, and she said something. She said, like, I had this expression, a dark turn of mind, and I was convinced I had heard it from someplace. Like, she didn't think she'd thought it up herself. And she searched and couldn't find it, but I knew I had heard it someplace. I heard it, and I thought, and I Googled it, and it was from Deadwood, the HBO series, which I don't know whether you're an aficionado of that show or not. Oh, it's so great. It's Calamity Jane. It's about the gold mine, the gold rush town, Deadwood, but it's got the most Shakespearean profanity ever written. Mm-hmm. The most amazing, really highly, highly recommended. But it was in there, and I found like a script and Googled it and found it. But it's interesting you talk about the use of the internet that way.
You found it, and she never found it, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I tweeted it to her. I wasn't trying to do a gotcha, but I just tweeted it at their Twitter. They probably don't read their own Twitter feed. Unlike you, they don't read their own Twitter feed. I don't think.
She's got more to do, probably.
Exactly. So I have a question about perspective. And one of the things I noticed in Upland Stories and to a lesser extent in Gone Away Backwards is there's a perspective, like a similar perspective that I saw in multiple songs, which is you looking back as an older man, but almost with a paternal perspective to the characters in the song. In one, it's in South Bend, I think it's explicit. Don't you say that, like, they were as if they were your children. I'm sorry I didn't copy the lyric. in Carolina Girls, though, or Carolina Gals, is a very similar image starting both tunes. I don't know whether you realize, like, you're sort of seated on a porch or whatever. In South Bend Lingers On, it's not clear where the narrator is, but it's watching these women walk down this dark street or whatever with the hearts dragged behind them like bridal veils. But in Carolina Gals, it's these loose limb gals. They swing their feet down the airport side of Franklin Street, and I watch them in a not quite innocent way as I look at them this evening. And so that was not quite paternalistic, but there's this in many of the songs in Upland Stories about, there's a picture on my mantle, my blue-eyed boy. I wish I just longed for my blue-eyed boy. There's several of these songs which are longing, some from a much older man and some from a person who's about your age. And I wonder if this was self-conscious or if this is just, you can only write about where you are and who you are and how you're feeling.
Yeah, I guess it is self-conscious. I think it seems like you know more my songs better than maybe I do.
Well, I had the advantage of preparing for this interview, You wrote.
I couldn't have snappy answers to all these things since you're talking about myself.
Yeah.
I think that just getting older, and maybe specifically getting to be 45, 50 years old, was for me a great boon. I was able to sort of change my my feeling about almost everything I do, like traveling and playing with other people in a group, and what kind of venues I play, what kind of songs I write. I was able to sort of update my view of all that stuff in a more positive view, because like the story of trying to be successful and make a mark is, for better or worse, behind you at that point. So I reached this age where I thought, I'm not altogether enjoying myself doing this, and I feel I've got more to learn as a writer, and I can probably get better as a guitar player and a band leader and various other aspects of what I do. So how do I do that, and how do I change up what I'm doing so that I can enjoy myself, be learning new things, also be easing into my 50s and 60s with where it's maybe not so physically demanding or like taxing on my tinnitus, for instance, like not during my early years. So all of this stuff, but the songwriting was maybe one of the easier things to change because, as you say, it's just it's a matter of perspective. So, for instance, writing a song from a father's point of view or a grandfather, and I'm both those things now, is a lot more natural and easy than, changing up the rooms that I play in, every year from this kind of room to that kind of room. That was probably a harder lift. But assuming the perspective of my age was very enjoyable because I think critically I look at what other people do, other songwriters and singer-songwriters do, and I'm often left feeling that they should play to their own age more. To be 50 and writing "I Love You" and "I Want to Take You in My Car" up into the hills, and finally I understand the meaning of carnal love thanks to this wonderful. It's just like I don't want to hear that from like a person of this age, and a lot of them are still understandably resorting to the same things that worked for them decades before. But I think there's a lot of opportunity in being this age, and it includes sometimes a melancholy point of view that is, if you think about it in a generic and commercial way, you think, people don't want to hear a bunch of like sad sack songs, but too bad,
It's funny because I'm 55. So I wonder when I listen to your songs and they resonate with me so deeply, is it just because in some way I'm cut from the same cloth and it's just hitting me because I'm going through similar passages in my own life and the perspective of time and many cultural references which you make, like our childhoods were during the same time and so on. I was even born in the South. I was born in Gainesville, Florida, and spent the first 5 years of my life there. My mother's side of the family is from the deep South. So, and I wonder if it's that, or is it the universal themes? But I just have to say that especially Gone Away Backward and Upland Stories, and to a certain extent, the Revenge of the Doberman. This massive, for the folks viewing the video who don't know this, you should buy all of Robbie's music and go to his website, which I'll link below. Revenge of the Doberman is a 52-song opus where an extraordinarily high percentage of them are really just fantastic songs. But these resonated with me more deeply, for example, than, the first song of yours which I ever heard and really loved was I Push Right Over, which I don't know what year that was. It had to be, early 90s or something like that? Southmouth, is that record?
Yeah, I think I wrote it in 95 and that record came out in 97, so that's a while back.
Yeah. And of course, Let's Kill Saturday Night. These are great, great songs, which I still love and admire, but they're very different than, a song like Needed from Upland Stories, which is another song written from the paternal perspective, to his son, So can you talk? I think I've asked you this when I've encountered you, in Chicago after a gig or something. But what happened with Gone Away Backward and Upland Stories? To me, it's this incredible burst of creativity. These magnificent, magnificent records. The Upland Stories nominated for 2 Grammys. Not that is a reliable marker of quality, but it's a conventional marker of quality for some people watching these videos, if they might not realize that. So what happened that allowed you to do this, or that prompted you to do these 2 records? And do you see them as of a piece the way I do?
It's kind of what I was just getting at. I hit I don't know, it sounds a little much to say I hit a wall, but in 2007 and 8, around there, I found that I wasn't enjoying as much. I was focusing more on the not enjoying it, and on this, on the idea that it was, I was stuck in this Groundhog Day kind of a loop of going to the same rooms with the same kind of offering, like a quartet of electric guitar, drum kit, bass guitar. Nice. I've been doing that for over 10 years, 12, 13 years. And I thought, even if I was enjoying this, I might want to change it up just for artistic growth, evolution. But the fact that I was, losing some hearing, as I said, the fact that I was just not enjoying it as much, I started to toy with the idea of what else can I do in life? What other kind of job could I take on? But then we moved to New York for a short time. In 2009, my wife got a job in a show there called Our Town, and it ran for a while. It ran for 9 months. So we were there for, it wasn't like moving, but we were definitely there for a considerable time. And while I was there, I started playing with a friend. My friend Jenny Scheinman she's a great fiddler, and she had a weekly gig in a little room there called Barbez in Brooklyn, and that was one experience that really jolted me in a positive direction, because I found that we started doing it sort of on an every week basis together, and I found that playing for just that small, 40 people, is about as much as would fit in that room, and we had they have a PA there that you sort of have to plug in and set up the mics yourself, and the mic stands are kind of wobbly and the soundboard's kind of wonky.
Was it just a duet? It was just you and Jenny on these gigs most of the time?
Right. And I found out all sorts of things, and they were all good. I enjoyed the silence of the room. I enjoyed being listened to. I enjoyed trying to think of things to say between songs. As silly as that sounds, when you're with a loud band and drums and everything, it's almost a liability to be talking much between the songs. You just
let it happen. I see.
But when you're another time sitting down, I thought, well, I enjoy all this. I enjoy playing into a mic and not plugging the guitar in. I enjoy being listened to. I enjoy a duo format where we can just listen to each other. And in a duo, you're always having to worry about staying out of somebody else's way, but the worry becomes wider and wider the more people you're playing with. It you really have to think about where not to play, when you're playing with a quartet or a quintet. But with another person, that's a very minimal worry. So you can play what you feel like playing, but you can also listen to every single thing the other person's playing. And for the audience, it's the same way. You can take in every single thing that's happening musically pretty easily. And I just loved all of that. So that was for me a pivot point into what I'm doing now, and into the idea of writing songs that didn't necessarily have to reach out and grab you by the lapels and shout in your face. I can play the guitar softly into a mic. I can sing about things that the listener has to do, maybe a little bit of work to piece together what I'm talking about.
I mean, one of the things that, to me, like with some of the greatest live music I've ever seen in my entire life was you and Don Sternberg at the Hideout. So the people watching, Robbie used to do a residency at this club called the Hideout in Chicago every Monday, or the first Monday of the month or whatever it was, for a long time. And occasionally he would play with this mutual friend of ours, the mandolin player, Don Sternberg. And it was just a duet, and it was absolutely unbelievable. And I don't know if you want to say anything about Don or about those gigs, if you enjoyed them as much as the audience seemed.
Well, all of that stuff really came out of that experience that I just mentioned with Jenny. So when I moved back to Chicago, I just wanted to keep doing that thing. And I set up the thing at the Hideout largely so that I could bring duo partners in, different duo partners, and have that same experience of just banging off of somebody else, creating a thing with two people, and having a small group of people in front of you sitting and listening. And it doesn't seem like a lot to ask for, but it was a new direction for me at the time. And so Don is one of a very small number of people, I would say, I don't know, half a dozen or 8 people in Chicago that I just really cherish that relationship with, that musical and personal relationship with. Don and Jenny and Nora O'Connor. Yeah. And I did some with Steve Frisbee and Robbie Gerso, of
course,
and Shad Cobb, and there are a couple others, but yeah, still the idea of 2 is very primary.
It's great. I'm so glad you did it, and for me, it's like it just hit absolutely, like it was absolutely in my zone for personally kind of what I like. So, like I'm a huge fan of Gillian Welch and David Rawlings, which the vast majority is just the 2 of them, and I think I like that for all the reasons that you just described. There's something for the listener as well about just a duet, and we can even go back to the Delmores and stuff like that.
Sure.
So I meant to ask in the very beginning, and I forgot and neglected. I put it at the top of my list. I forgot to ask it, which is, how are you? How are you doing? I mean, you are a live performer for a big part of your livelihood, and so how's life? How's pandemic life for you?
It sounds offensive, but I'm enjoying it largely. I like reading and practicing the guitar and cooking food and watching movies and being with my wife. And I mean, those are all in the top 10 list of things I like to do, and I get to do them all day long now. But I do like traveling, and I do like making money. And I've made a little money with online stuff, which has been for me unforeseeable and delightful, that people are nice about tipping when I do an online show, things like that. Sold a little bit more online merchandise than usual. Yeah. It's definitely something that's not sustainable for years, but for, I don't have any big problem with just doing that this year.
Gotcha. I'm glad to know that you're healthy and well. I do think, I mean, do you have any thoughts? I in preparing for this, I asked some of our mutual friends around Chicago, so what should I ask Robbie? and John Rice said, ask him what's going to happen to live performance in the future. I know that you don't have a crystal ball, but what do you sense from all of your other friends who are live performers and from the venue owners and so on?
Well, I know for myself that I'm in an age group where I have to take it more seriously than I probably would if I were 20.
Yep.
I see how my sons react to it, and I think that they should be less blasé about it, but I have to admit that I would probably be more blasé about it if I were their age. So for myself, thinking about returning to club work, I think, well, sure, if there's a smaller, if you can see that the risk is demonstrably smaller, if the hospitals are functioning, if there's some idea that the people working in the club might have some immunity, demonstrated immunity, and that there will be distancing in the club,
Yeah.
all of this stuff. I mean, it portends a totally different, or a much different landscape for playing in a room like Space in Evanston.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine that the capacity would be, 60, 70 people in that room, and what it would look like, and some people masked. And
Yeah.
I just suspect that that's what we'll be looking like whenever things are semi-normalized. And who knows when, if ever, it'll go back to the way that it was.
Yeah. I saw, I'm on the mailing list for the Old Town School of Folk Music, for their concert series. And I just got an email from them this morning, and it was announcing the Jayhawks are playing, the great Minnesota band. I love them. And fourth show added for the Jayhawks. And I thought, when is that going to be? Who's going to, because the first 3 shows are presumably sold out.
When is this?
It's in November. So at least Old Town School is gambling that they're going to be able to host sold out shows for the Jayhawks in November.
Well, maybe they cut their capacity in half, and that's why.
That's interesting. I haven't seen that, so maybe that's going to be it. But being in the same age group as you, I feel the same way. I don't know how soon I would go back and be in a crowded club. Maybe with a mask. So let's get on with some other questions. You talked about humility. I can't remember which essay it was. I think it might have been the Shania Twain one. I'm not sure, where you said there's no humility in songwriting anymore. What's the place of humility in songwriting? And I think you're making a comment on older country music too. You're saying these older country songs were characterized by humility and not so much anymore. It's like braggadocio is the common point of view.
Gosh, I'm a little stumped on what the original context of that was with Shania.
Forgive me for not writing down the whole content. Maybe it wasn't the Shania essay. I do remember it was just, you were saying that
it had something to do with the particular strength that country brings to the genres, because now popular music is so dominated by hip hop.
Yes.
And I'm certainly no expert on that. I'm very inexpert on that.
Yeah, me too.
But from what I know about it, braggadocio does occupy a lot of the emotional tone of that music, where it seems like country music could bring a countervailing set of attitudes. Even if it's a false humility, it's probably worth something.
Yeah. So you also talked about curiosity in the Lightfoot essay. You're saying, that the critical thing about being productive into middle age is maintaining curiosity. So could you expand on that at all? I teach a lot about empathic communication skills. And one of the things we say about empathy is just maintain your curiosity to be empath. So I wondered if you saw a connection there to empathy, or just what curiosity means to you in this kind.
Well, curiosity is there's a big piece of self-interest in it, right? Because to keep in the game and to keep writing interesting quality songs, you have to stay interested in the world. And if you're only interested in yourself, or more specifically, if you're interested in repeating the effects that you've already established, years ago, which I think was the gravamen of my beef against Gordon Lightfoot, then you're in decline, I would say. So humility and empathy and curiosity. I think, again, that we're talking about points of view that come easier to an older writer, maybe. Again, a young person who's just so anxious to make his mark and to torch and burn, at least I was when I was a younger writer, has a why would those things even matter to a younger writer? The importance of them doesn't seem clear at all. But in an older writer, apart from whatever qualities empathy and humility have, the virtue of them, there's to sound a little shallow about it, when you present yourself that way, you're doing yourself a favor. The world can take you. The world's more eager to see you that way when you're old, I think.
That's interesting.
So there's a nice loop that's established. I try to act more humbly, even in moments when I'm not feeling humble. And then I actually do start to feel humble. And then I learn that the world likes to see me.
Yeah. So do you think there's an ageism that insists that we be more humble because our bodies are more frail and we're less attractive? And is that the humility that comes with age? Or
Totally. I think so.
Failed more and had more disappointments and, are more in touch with the finitude of life. There's so many great quotes I want to ask you about. Let me see. So you say in the Johnny Cash article, you say that you're talking about Cash. So it's called the Americana series. What's the name of that series of records? So that people watching
American Recordings.
The American Recordings, which is just this incredible series of 6 records or something like that, recorded by Rick Rubin and Johnny Cash solo in the starkest, most stripped down recording setting you can possibly imagine. Most of the time, just Johnny Cash and an acoustic guitar, and sometimes a little bit of very spare instrumentation. And it's just an incredible kind of set of documents. And somebody's doing classic standards from the American repertoire. Occasionally he's doing Tom Petty songs, and he does Hurt, that 9 Inch Nails song or whatever. There's these amazing things. But you say about him that it was a performance. He goes out to see Rick Rubin, and it's not that he was conning him, but he was selling him. And you said that, remember that performing is separate from being, no matter how naturalistic and authentic seeming the performance. Only by compartmentalizing the performing and the natural selves can someone have a career as long as Johnny Cash's was. So this struck me as just absolutely fascinating, this compartmentalization and this authenticity. So could you say more about this? What does this say about the idea of authenticity?
Mm-hmm. Well, so the idea of Johnny selling the thing and of Johnny's thing being a little bit of an act, that didn't originate with me in that story. There was a quotation from I think from
producer friend of yours.
Yeah, I think it was David, or I can't remember who said it now, but I was kind of running with that idea that was interesting to me, that Johnny was not the person. I saw a picture of him pop up on the internet yesterday where he's sitting in a bush and rubbing a piece of cake into his face. And I mean, this is the real person that the people knew him best talk about. Like, he's a goofball.
Yeah.
Another friend of mine, I always enjoyed this little anecdote, but David Rowe, that played bass with Johnny for a while, told me that they were pulling up to backstage behind a show, and like, over here's the stage, they're in the bus and they're looking out the other window, and there's a big chain link fence, and behind the fence are 200 people pressed to the fence getting a look at the bus and waving, and Johnny looks out and just kind of mutters. He goes, pastures of germ, he goes. Germ being the term that you use, when somebody's being obsequious or something, they're germy or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, he was. He could be. I guess he could be jaundiced and humorous and quite down to earth.
But what about the sort of what I saw as the kind of deeper point? One of the things that I teach about on this channel, and when I teach college students, is there's a sociologist named Irving Goffman who wrote about. He was famous for something called the dramaturgical theory of the self, which is basically the world is a stage. All of us are actors on this stage, and he wrote a lot about what he called self-presentation, which is that the self we always present is always a performance, and that and that there are many of these selves which we present to different audiences, but there's no core self. It's performances all the way down.
Oh, interesting.
So you say something similar, but not exactly the same. But you do say, the performing self is separate from being. So having performed as much as you have since you were, a young man, what can you say about? I've seen you perform many times. I know it's a larger than life persona and so on. You have a tremendous amount of charisma, which projects, and I have met you off stage too. So I know it's not the same, but how do you think about the performing self in regard to the authentic self? Is there, what's that difference?
Well, I think if you were committed to just being yourself on stage, I can't imagine what that would even be like. But if that were the idea, that I'm not going to bullshit anybody. I'm just going to go up and if I'm in a bad mood one day, I'm going to show that. If I'm and obviously there's a little bit of that holds true, right? But if your idea is that you're not an actor, just yourself, then you're not even doing your job remotely, right? Like your job, part of your job is to have consistency and to go out and do 6 shows a week or whatever it is. And not give one audience a worse or a different show than another audience. You're doing something that's supposed to be replicable and consistent. So I don't think that's an option really, to be yourself. But the other another point about authenticity, I think, is that, like, I hear people say, I heard somebody on the radio say the other day that courage was the one virtue that where you pretend to it, it's the same as actually having it.
Yeah, that's
interesting. Tend to be courageous and go into battle by vanquishing your inner cowardliness.
Yeah.
I think you've heard this idea too. But
yeah.
I think there are probably other areas of life where that idea applies to, and to me that gets back to performance. If you're trying to be charismatic, even though you're not naturally charismatic, and that's what I do when I get on stage, because I'm naturally a non-charismatic and shy and introspective person. But if you act that way, then you are that way. It's like Schopenhauer said when he was a boy, he ran into this idea in a storybook that it said, who are happy people? Happy people are people that smile all the time. Unhappy people frown. And he said, I'm 5 and I'm reading this and I can see obviously this is bullshit, but he said, all my life I've kind of been haunted by, there's something true about that.
There's these famous, the partly bullshit, experiments in social psychology where they make people, like, they check your mood and then they make people put a pencil in their mouth and you have to kind of smile to do it. And then they measure their mood and they claim this reliably elevates people's moods. Right. So like the action precedes the mood. Could you tilt your camera up just a tiny bit, Robbie? Sometimes I'm only getting, that's it. Perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you. But in Americana music and really in hip hop too, in hip hop, they say keeping it real, right? And in Americana music, there's this idea of authenticity, which is like central to the brand in some ways of Americana music. But what I tell my students often is that authenticity is just another performance. If you look at a lot of people trying to look authentic, they're all dressed the same way. It's the authenticity costume or whatever. So is there anything to authenticity beyond just another layer of performance?
To appearing authentic?
Yeah, right. You get what I'm driving at in terms of either Americana music. You send it up a little bit. What's the rockabilly tune you do? Where
Roots Rock Weirdos?
Yeah. Where you're sending up how costumed they are as they're trying to, live their authentic 50s selves or whatever.
Yeah, I guess it's a little bit more shaded than what I was just saying. The exception to what I was the anti-authenticity points are that when you are in a bad mood, you probably do project that, and you might not even want to hide that totally. But then in a broader sense, what you've been listening to in music for the last 4 years, and the performers that you've enjoyed and have been inspired by, they're coming through in what you're doing.
Yeah.
So all of that's authentic. That's not
Right.
and you're singing about things that matter to you, and you're engaging with the audience in the moment. And at some level, you're reading how both of you feel in the moment. So there's a lot to what I do anyway. That's improv, and the closer you get to improvisation, I think the closer you're getting to the kind of authenticity that we're talking about.
That's nice. I'm so glad you brought that up, because one of my questions, my questions about performance is, what has happened to improvisation? In popular music, it's almost completely gone. I guess in country music, you get 4-bar or maybe 8-bar guitar solos or something like that, but they seem composed most of the time. Even though I know these studio guys are like some of the greatest improvisers in the world, these guys in Nashville, but they're so carefully played. They seem composed, so beautifully phrased and everything. And then in a lot of the music on the radio, not that I listen to it very much, but I know that there's virtually no improvisation anymore. Like you and I both came of age in the 70s when like the guitar solo or the keyboard solo, even bass solos and drum solos, were on big hit records. So the thing about bluegrass music and Americana music, whatever, is there's still improvisation all the time in every song. So what's up with improvisation? It's still a big part of your music. What can you say about it?
Yeah, I love it, and it's a little different on record than on stage, I guess. And also, there's waves of how that stuff goes over the history. I guess by history, I just mean the last 100 or 120 years. Like Ellington's band would get up on stage and play, through composed solos. They played the solos from the records, and so that's.
Did they do that every night? I didn't know that. Like when they would play when they would tour, they'd just play the solo from the record.
So. I think so. I'm not an expert there either, but I think that I'm certain that the idea of playing what was on the record didn't originate, just in the last 10 years. It goes back a ways, and you can see that as soon as like recorded music came along, that would create that idea. Now we've got a product, and we're going out and we're recreating that experience for people. So right there, improvisation is put into the back seat as soon as records rise in importance. And then as far as making a record, I feel that there are economical trends that have played into that. So if you're in 1953 and you're Ray Price, and you go in and you have 6 hours to make a 12-song LP, then
not a lot of time to get the solo right.
Yeah, that seems. Well, I'm thinking out loud now, but it seems to me to invite a higher level of improvisation. It definitely invites a higher level of mistakes. So once you're allowing mistakes into the mix, it seems to me the easiest way to make that work is just to allow more flexibility into the design. If the idea is that we're going to record 12 songs in 8 hours or something. And
a lot of the times those records would have been recorded live, right? Everybody playing at the same time.
Recorded live, but they're getting a band that they've been on the road maybe with the players for all year working on some of the material. But in other cases in country music, like the Buck Owens records that you can think about, like Tom Brumley that played the steel told me in the mid-60s, told me that he'd go in, they'd throw a song at him. It would be in a weird key a lot of the times because Buck liked to play in, G sharp and in keys that would get out in the radio. And so Tom said that he'd do his best in the studio with what they threw him, but that he'd have memories of his own playing that were so abysmal that he would never play the records after they came out because he knew that to him it sucked. So anyway, a long-winded way of saying that it's I don't think there's been a consistent trend maybe one way or the other in records or on stage performance, but I think there's probably been as the record business got bigger, between the 60s and the 90s, I bet that you could chart a definite push away from improvisation on record, and I would bet that pushed against the idea of going out on stage and playing whatever, if you have an 8-bar break, that you would just fill it with whatever, as opposed to what the fans already knew from the record. I bet that
But
those were solid trends.
but it seems to me, I mean, I wonder what your music. I've seen you play live many times. You're a, a an extraordinary improviser, and also what I was about to say, a radical improviser. So it strikes me that your flat picking improvisational style is always on the edge of being out of control. And it's the edge of chaos, which is not what it's like on the records. The records have more thought out, beautiful, and obviously had as many takes as you needed on the record. But it strikes me that what improvisation does in this kind of music that you and I like is that there's the words, which are beautiful, and the melodies, but then the solo section comes and it gets to say something that the words can't say. And I just wonder whether, what's your take on that? And how do you balance, what you're trying to say in the improvisation? Because to me, the solo section is often more cathartic, more moving than the composed, verses or whatever.
Right. I've never thought super deeply about this subject, maybe, or not as hard as I should have thought. But when you've got a set of words, like presumably you have a script and it's the same all the time,
Yeah.
the same words as the night before.
Yeah.
But I've become probably more aware over the years that you have to sort of resist the idea of phoning it in. Same words as last night, same melody notes.
Yeah.
I'm doing the same thing. No, I'm not doing the same thing. It's now, and I'm doing something different. So if George Jones is somebody that you can never tire of watching for ideas about how to approach the live performance of scripted words in a song. So the melody is always different every performance.
Yeah.
And this is, talk about radical.
Yeah.
To change the melody. But you can hear his brain working in real time. You can hear him. I think I can hear him get to a line and a millisecond before it visualize 12 different ways to go with it, getting rid of these options, picking this one option, keeping it staid and predictable for a little bit, and then doing something totally to vary it, something totally unpredictable, jumping up an octave. The range he had was a big part of it. But now comparing this to what happens when a guy starts to play or a woman starts to play a solo. So here's sort of the opposite danger in improv is that so again, the danger in the scripted thing is that you start to think of it as the same all the time, and that you're just repeating something you've done, a set of physical motions, and that's bad. But the danger of improv is that's pretty obvious, is that you're going to do something that's not going to be very good as compared to something that you would have thought of in advance and worked on and edited. And I think this is one reason why people tend to play the same solos, and also to resort to even when you're an improv player, like if you've seen me and Red Volkart play at one of our duo shows, he's way out on the edge of people that just surprise you all the time.
Yeah.
They'll play different things all the time.
Yeah.
Shad Cobb as well. On the other hand, as far out on that spectrum as they are, they definitely have a style which implies that they have a bag of tricks is a rough way to put it, but in some ways it's a bag of tricks, and it's physical moves and melodic ideas that they depend on. And so in that sense, it's just not like opening up your brain and letting whatever happen.
Right. This is like a simplistic notion of improvisation as if it's completely free, but it's obviously constrained by the harmony, constrained by the melody. I mean, the interesting thing about improvisation to me is I remember reading a story of Bill Monroe, scolding one of his players at some point that, you had to make it say the words. He told some fiddle player or whatever it was who was taking a solo that you have to make it say the words. And he would say, especially at the end of the chorus or verse form that you're soloing over, you have to quote the melody from the lyric so that people hear it. And I mean, I get that, especially in that era of bluegrass, but when I'm listening to improvisers, especially on the guitar, which is my own instrument too, it's when they cue just close enough to the melody that I can follow it, and that are doing the variations. So that inspires me the most, because the words are still going through my head, when we're playing over the chorus or the verse form, and I hear the melody. Something about that is really powerful. We both know improvisers who are just incredibly gifted, but they can play far away from the melody, and that doesn't move me nearly as much.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are just some guys that can really do it. I think Dexter Gordon could play all day long, and he could veer away from the melody, and it would just be consistently interesting. I mean, there's some just it's a kind of a genius, I think that some people have, but it's not very evenly or widely distributed. So so the idea of being constrained by the melody, by the storyline and the tone of the song, those are usually pretty important.
Oh, so many other songs, Robbie. What now? There's a quote you said, I can't remember which of the essays that I read to prepare. It said, every subcategory of labor in the music business tends to bring dizziness and boredom, except for performance, which makes you feel like a god. Which I get it. And I think that's great. I asked you what guitar you play.
I mean, I think it's for every job, right? I mean, there's a lot of fatigue and boredom.
Drudgery, absolutely. Yeah. I remember, people, when I'm training young researchers and stuff like that, and academics, scientists, I have to tell them how much drudgery there is. When I was young, I would still have to lick envelopes and put stamps on stuff to send out surveys. And the graduate students thought someone else should be doing this. I said, no, there's no one else. This is part of the job. Or the endless amount of data cleaning that we do, or just the endless amount of revisions that we do when we write manuscripts. The student thinks if they revise a manuscript once or something, they've made a gigantic sacrifice. And I say, well, no, when I write a manuscript, it's revised 20 times or 40 times, just for them an incomprehensible number of times, especially if it's written collaboratively.
Oh yeah, the things that young musicians used to do when I was out with them were to me unbelievable. Like the idea that every red roof hotel room should have a hairnet in it so you could shower. The idea that we'd send club promoters a long form to fill out that included questions like whether there was a shower for us on premises. And I'm like, do you see what we're doing? We're drumming ourselves at hit holes, and we're holding it together with masking tape and rubber bands. And the idea that you could come across, that you could counter that with process, and with the idea that we're important people and you need to cater to us, it's not going to fly.
Interesting. So Dylan wins the Nobel Prize for songwriting in literature, right? Or the Nobel Prize for literature for being a songwriter. I guess, first of all, just what's your take on that? And, what does it mean for a song to rise to the level of being literature? I mean, I think your songs are literary. I really do. I think your songs, whatever that threshold is, your songs exceed it. But what is it? And what was your reaction when Dylan won the Nobel Prize for literature?
Well, I read different reactions to that, and to some extent assimilated contradictory reactions to them, I would say. I think that it represents reality, that especially with the age group of people that are making decisions about who gets Nobel Prizes, and that is literature in their world, and that it's just what it is. But that wasn't the case 30 years ago, and probably won't be the case 50 years from now.
Interesting.
Something will come along to change that understanding of Bob Dylan lyrics as literature. And my own gut reaction is always to recoil a little bit from the idea that, for instance, I was interviewing Rodney Crowell, and I said, was there a moment when you were young where you thought, oh yeah, I'm a songwriter? That really is me. And he said, not exactly, but there was a moment when I thought, I'm a poet, he said. So he sort of corrected it and upgraded it. And I thought, nah, I'm not going for that, because...
You personally, or you're not buying Rodney Crowell saying that?
No, I believe that's what he thought.
Yeah.
But I don't believe that... I don't believe that poet is a higher distinction than songwriter, is what it comes down to.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I think he was trying to raise the game, and I think that I think they're different forms. That people that write good songs don't necessarily write good poetry, and vice versa. And I even think that a song is a more powerful, a more potent weapon than a poem most of the time. But I don't know a ton of poetry, so I'm talking out of turn there.
Yeah.
But I think like I'm so lonesome I could cry. I don't know what 20th century poem would compare to that for endurance or beauty. It's just for me, it's the song. The song is the noblest thing that you could do.
I agree. Certainly, nothing has moved me as much as songs have. It's not even close. There's just no art form that moves me as much as songs. And I'm not sure I can describe it, because I am moved by poetry. There's poetry that really moves me. Mary Oliver or Rumi or lots of other poets that I'm deeply moved by it, but not the way. And I don't return to poetry as often. I'm basically constantly listening to songs and have been all of my life. And it's just, I'm not constantly reading poetry. You said something interesting comparing poets and poetry and song. I have it here somewhere. I'm not sure I could find it. That a song has to be comprehended in real time or something. You remember that sentiment expressing?
Sure.
So what's that about? I think it was a contrast to a poem. And at first I didn't know what you meant at all. And then I thought I figured out what you meant, but I'll just ask you, what did you mean?
Well, I'm talking about a recording of a song as opposed to, a poem on the page.
Yeah.
And what you were just saying reminds you that, the music in poetry is while it's inherent, it's what you bring to it. It's the sound of your own voice reading the words and hearing the words in your head as you read. So you're very complicit in that process of creating the music, but not so much when you listen to a recording. You're having the music kind of laid out and presented for you.
Yeah.
So that's a question for a higher pay grade than my mind to take on.
Yeah, I took this. Well, go ahead.
But as far as the time element, I think time is everything in music. I think it starts with rhythm, and as Charlie Parker, the great Charlie Parker heads began with rhythm, and so I take it that's paramount. And I think that that recordings attain their beauty in part from making use of a chunk of time, and that once that we've we've taken that in and comprehended that, then one of the reasons we want to return to it, right, is to recreate that remembered experience in time.
Interesting.
In a different chunk of time. So it's I don't know. I'm getting beyond where I can analyze it, but I think
I took you to mean that the song, by its nature, because it's this thing that's unfolding in real time, like that a lyric has to be appreciated in the moment. That it's ephemeral, it's fleeting, and that if your listeners can't make sense of it in the moment, it's kind of not working. And whereas I would thought you might have been like with a poem, you can sit and reread the line over and over again until it makes some sense.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting at, and to make a craftsman point in that piece of writing was saying that you have the choice. Rewinding the song is not really a choice a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And if you're listening on the radio or so forth, or if you have to pick up the needle of the record, and that's what you were. But it's easy enough to go up one line. It's easy enough to stop and look off in the distance and think about what a line means. So you control the time experience with a piece of writing. You don't really control it with a recording. And so the way that plays out in the writing of lyrics and music both, but specifically with lyrics, is that you can't get. Usually you can't get overly dense, right?
Although it's
point.
I was kind of I was asking myself, is this really true? Is this really true of songs? Do the lyrics work in real time? And I thought, a record like Upland Stories, which without exaggeration, I've probably listened to 100 times or more, and probably 30 times in the last month. I get something. Repeated listening is rewarding, so I didn't get everything out of those songs in real time. I just didn't, both. I mean, sometimes I just really didn't hear the words. I didn't understand exactly what the story and it kind of washes over you sometimes. And when I'm able to walk at night with headphones on and not much distraction, I could sort of listen very, very carefully and then even on repeated listening.
With those songs or whatever equivalent song you might mention, the first time that you hear it and experience it, you don't want to be beset by questions about
that's interesting.
What does that nonsense mean? And what is that meaningless group of chords that went nowhere? And you just want a smooth ride that sounds like it correlates to experience and feels natural and feels right. It's an experience you want to return to. So I think that lyrical density point even applies to the first listening. But you're right. Some writers have that knack where, going back to Rodney's point, where they can write a set of lyrics. I think Paul Simon's one of those guys where if you put it on the page, it really does kind of read like a poem, and you can linger on lines and go back up and reread the line before, and then return to the set of lyrics the next day and get kind of a new and deeper experience out of it.
Yeah.
But some people are able to, sorry, I keep saying guys, but some people are really able to attain that kind of ambiguity and multi-layered density. I don't think you have to hit.
Could be a great song. No, I agree. I mean, I think of Leonard Cohen, who I think wrote the most beautiful lyrics of any popular songwriter ever, the most poetic. But Leonard Cohen was a poet. If you know about his life, I was in New York about 18 months ago, and there was a Leonard Cohen retrospective exhibit at one of the museums, and we went and saw it. And I learned a lot of things about his biography, but he's just absolutely incredible. And I actually don't like a lot of his songs as songs. Like, he has that strange speaking monotone. I don't think his melodies are inspired a lot of the time. And here I am judging Leonard Cohen, right? But the words are unmatched in their beauty. And I have one of his books of lyrics, and it can easily be read as poetry. And I think in a lot of ways appreciated, more deeply than his songs. Sometimes I lose patience with his songs. I'm embarrassed to say that on the one of the very last tours, his manager screwed him and he had to go tour when he was 75 or whatever. Do you know the whole story behind that? The manager ran off. There's a classic music business story, right? The manager screwed him out of a bunch of royalties, or an investment advisor. Somebody took a bunch of his money. So he finds himself at age 75 or something, having no choice but to go mount a world tour so he wasn't going to be destitute. So he goes and does this thing. But I went and saw him at the Rosemont Theater, that place on River Road in Chicago. It was a beautiful, large theater, and it was packed. And I left early. I feel terrible because it was like one of his last, but every song is the same tempo, every song is a very similar feel. There's no up-tempo Leonard Cohen songs, and by this, it was probably like maybe a Friday night after a long work week or something, and I was just tired. And it was a long show, and like the lyrics are so unbelievably beautiful, but eventually we bailed out. So maybe I'll edit this part out of the video, because I'm ashamed of
walking. There's a lot of people that just focus so much on the lyrics, and I've never been able to quite get behind that myself. To the point that about the difference between poetic lines and song lyrics.
Yeah,
I was just wanted to add that I always think of that Steve Allen reciting the lyrics to Hound Dog to the bust of the dog on the Tonight Show in the 50s.
I'd have to go look at that on YouTube. I'll try to link that below if it's on YouTube.
He thought he was making such a devastating point and satirizing rock music or rock and roll music by reciting Hound Dog as a poem, right? So I always refer back to that in my head, because what he thought he was doing, he just wasn't doing. He was making himself look foolish,
right.
But the song just lives and lives, and it's got nothing to do with the banality or the clichédness of the lyrics. It's something to do with performance and with the power of as Noel Coward says, the power of cheap music and whatever, simple words.
Yeah. Doc Watson, I know you did this thing recently with, like, you actually did this mini tour, right? Where you got to play with Jack Lawrence. For people who may not know on the videos, Doc Watson's the father of flat picking acoustic guitar music. May he rest in peace. He was my hero. He was the person who got me into this music. And I bought a copy of the record Southbound for my little brother as a gift. And it was a classic example of buying something for someone else that you really wanted for yourself. And I think my brother listened to it once and said, I don't like this at all. You know, you take it. And it completely changed my life, like literally changed my life. Prior to that, I saw Jerry Garcia. He came to Chicago and played the Auditorium Theater solo, which for him, it was with him and a bass player. I can't remember the bass player that he used to play with. So he came to the Auditorium Theater. It was like 1982. And I went down there with one of my high school friends, and we saw Jerry Garcia play, and it was just him playing an acoustic guitar, but he played all these old time tunes. You know, he played some Dead tunes, but he played a bunch of old time tunes, the stuff that he later would play with Grisman, you know, and it was incredible. I never heard anything like it. And of course, being so naive, I thought at the time that he was the originator of this music. You know, I thought, oh, that's where this music comes from, Jerry Garcia. And it was only later when I heard that Doc record, I thought, oh, that's where this really comes from. So it's a long preamble to my question about Doc.
Yeah. So, I mean, the idea that it comes from here or there is even kind of funny because, I mean, you go back to Doc and you find out about the Delmore brothers, and you find out about, what were their names? Rutherford. I can't remember the names of that, the name of that 20s act right now, but you find out about all the records that he loved to listen to. He was
listening to the Skillet Lickers or whatever else.
Right.
Yeah.
And you find out how varied his diet was, how open he was. And, you know, Jack Lawrence told me that one of his favorite songs to do, he always wanted to do this one moody blues song. I forget the name of it, but he just
loved White Satin. Was it? I'm trying to remember what, oh no, it was St. James Infirmary? Who was a rock band that did St. James Infirmary? Wasn't that one?
Eric Burden or somebody?
Oh yeah. What's a Moody Blues song? What song would it have been? I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, he was just open. And so, you know, you think that stuff just begins. Like I had the point of view that everything just like was year zero was like Doc's first record. You know?
Yeah. Me too.
But he was a link in a chain, just like everybody else. And, you know, as great as his innovations were, he was a link in a chain. And so it's wonderful to get beyond those experiences of like yours with Jerry Garcia or me with the Elvis Costello record, Almost Blue. I'm like, oh, this is great country music, you know, but then it points you in all these other directions behind him.
I mean, the interesting thing about Doc is, which I'm sure you know, is that when Doc was discovered, he was on the road playing electric guitar with a piano player and honky tonks. He was a thoroughly modern person, you know.
And Ralph Rinsler convinced him to dress in a different way and present himself in a different way.
Go back and
his grandparents.
Take pictures with Gaither Carlton on the porch of the cabin and stuff like that. And
oh yeah, couldn't come up with a more inauthentic performer than Doc Watson.
It's interesting that it circles back to our idea of authenticity, right? That I mean, Doc for me is the absolute paragon of humility and in a sense authenticity, because I do think he was being himself. And I mean, I was always struck. I never met and said hello to Doc, but I had some close encounters with him once at the Old Town School of Folk Music. Believe it or not, I actually opened for the opener for Doc. I don't know if you know Eric Lugash, the finger-picking guitar player from Chicago. So I was a student of Eric's, you know, learning these solo finger-picking stuff. And Doc played at the Old Town School.
Yeah, Armitage.
On Armitage. And I got to warm up for Eric, and then Eric warmed up for Doc. So it sort of technically warmed up for Doc playing these things. So I had a close encounter with him then. And then at Merle Fest, you know, in the 90s, I went there and Doc would just walk around and get a corn dog or something like that, you know, between sets. And I remember I was so in awe of him. Really, there's no that I couldn't actually approach him. I had my opportunity. I was 5 feet from him. And, you know, for people who don't know, Doc was blind. So he was being kind of walked through the fairgrounds to get back to the stage or something. And he was right there. But I was almost speechless. But there were times that, I don't know, did you ever go to Merle Fest, Robbie?
No, I used to play there this last month, but it got canceled, unfortunately. I'm playing there next year, supposedly.
Cool. So I mean, it's a great thing, but you can get to very close quarters with
Yeah.
the performers. And so I saw Doc there, and I think I just told him I loved him or something like that. I was just so moved by his presence. You know, there's certain performers that they hardly seem real when you finally meet
Right.
them.
Right. No, I'm with you all the way on Doc.
Yeah.
He was just unbelievable. And unlike other guitar players that have come along since, great, prodigious guitar players,
Yeah.
his playing just sounds better and better over the years. And I think largely for the reason that you mentioned earlier, like his adherence to the melodic concept,
His phrasing is unmatched. It's just absolutely
his
unmatched.
drive.
Yeah.
And there's guys that come along and play faster and cleaner and jazzier and this and
Yeah.
that, but his style, for me, his style never just never ages. It's always so exciting.
It's perfect. It's just I remember, introducing Kurt Morrison to the Doc's bluegrass album, "Riding the Midnight Train." I don't know if you know that record, which is just a fantastic, fantastic album. And I remember Kurt just saying, it's just perfect. It's just perfect music. Melodically, it's so absolutely beautiful. If you listen to the solo breaks on those songs, they sound composed, and I'm sure Doc had a few tries to get them right in the studio, but if you ever heard Doc live, they were virtually that perfect when you saw him live. His just sense of rhythm, his sense of phrasing, his ability to follow the melody and yet be novel. This is incredible. Plus his integrity singing and stuff like that. It's just really incredible.
Yeah, that to me is the height of being a performer, is when really the line between what you do in your living room and what you do on a stage in front of people is just gone, and then he could be sitting under a tree, he could be sitting on stage, he could be sitting in his basement. It would always sound as good and the same. I'm guessing.
Did you ever get to meet him, Robbie, in your travels? Did you ever meet Doc?
I never met Doc. No, just getting to play with Jack, who's Doc's sideman, and we've got other dates on the books. You mentioned the one that we did last year, but hopefully, if normality ever returns, we'll do more of that. But to play with him as close as I got to Doc, and it's funny, but in a way, I would kind of rather play with Shaq because I feel relaxed compared to how I would feel if I got to play with Doc Watson. And we can sit around and laugh about Doc Watson. Is the thing. I couldn't have done that with Doc Watson.
Yeah. I think that it would be so. I've actually had dreams about playing with Doc, meeting him, stuff like that. When I went to Merlefest, I was such a devotee that I made like a pilgrimage. I went to Deep Gap, which is not that far from Merlefest is in, I can't remember. In Wilkesboro, right. So you go like another 45 minutes up the road into the mountains and you're in Deep Gap. Right. And in Deep Gap, there's a post office on the road and that's it, and there's like a road called Watson Lane or something like that. And I just felt, partially scared that they were going to shoot a Yankee if I went back up into the side roads, and partially just deferential that I didn't want to go and gape at, people's homes. But I think I had a picture of myself taken at the Deep Gap post office or something like that. It's interesting to be there in that place, although also easy to romanticize.
Agreed.
Yeah. So a couple of other questions about influences. So, for me, the Delmores, when I heard the Delmore brothers play for the first time, what was interesting to me is I struggled for a long time when I was younger to sing harmony. It still doesn't come easily to me. But when I heard the Delmore brothers sing and that brother harmony, I could hear both parts so clearly. It was one of the first experiences where I thought, oh my God, I could, even more than the Everly brothers, I got to just hear those parts. And plus the way that the Delmores would solo, those kinds of really simple solos, but we're at the root of all kind of bluegrass music. So I know you've covered on Revenge of the Dobermans, there's a Delmore brothers song, I think. And I can't remember if you did that the Hideout too.
Yeah. Can't you see that? Don't you see that train? I think it's on there. And that's got a few examples of their weird approaches to harmony. It's got whole note intervals, for instance, I think, in it, and I think it's got unison in it.
Yeah.
And so I love that approach. Lubin's picked up the thread from that too. Yes. But feeling free to do octaves, unison, whole notes, strange intervals, and then also to cross over each other. I love those ideas. It's much more interesting than, the Everlys are obviously great singers, and then the material that they did is a whole other thing.
Yep.
But the harmonic, sort of comparatively rigid approach to harmony, as opposed to what we're talking about, and I think people can perceive that since it's earlier in the day. Delmores go back to, how far did they go back? Early 40s?
Yeah, even the 30s, maybe. I mean, they were
Late
one of
30s,
the, when does Grand Ole Opry start? They were one of the very first acts on the Opry.
Grand Ole Opry started like at 26, but
did it? So maybe it's later. But
Delmores were a little later, but you can hear that as like primitive, modern.
Yes.
Oh, that's more primitive.
Yes.
The Everly Brothers. I don't see it that way at all. I see that, in fact, that some creativity has been kind of streamlined and lost over the years, maybe.
There's a line from the Delmore brothers, Alton or Rabin, whoever lived longer, wrote that autobiography. And
Truth is stranger than publicity.
Yeah. That book of mine, which you have through Don Sternberg, which I will get back from you someday.
I haven't. So, you're saying?
Don, I lent that book to Don, and Don told me he lent it to you.
I don't remember that at all.
Okay, very good.
I would ask Don again about that book.
Okay, I'll go back to him and get it back. But there's the line in there where, the people may not realize like how brutal. Who was the guy who ran the Opry then, the impresario?
Oh, Jim, was it Jim Denny or was it somebody else?
I can't remember. But whoever the sort of owner, impresario, MC, the person who made the rules at the Opry and put you on or not. If you got on the Opry, you could make a lot of money in personal experience. It was this incredible exposure, right? Because the signal was so strong. It was listened to all over the Southeast and the Midwest and so on. So the Delmores were on the Opry, but they were paid like some incredible pittance, $50 or something like that. I think they were paid for each Saturday night appearance. And of course, they couldn't live on that. So they had to go make personal appearances all around the Southeast all the time, but they had to be back for the Opry on Saturday night. So it was completely unforgiving, like the pace of how many, and they were doing cakewalks and barn dances and square dance. I mean, there was no glamour in it. It was just a constant grind of these things and personal appearances outside of department stores and whatever else. And Alton or Raymond, whoever wrote the book, said he ultimately came to hate smiling and to hate the fans. And I thought that was harsh, but I got it in some way. I just wonder, can you relate to that when you have to put on that? Is it just too much after a while?
Well, like I said, I hit that wall some years ago, but no, I think I tend to take a positive idea from those old timers. I do remember. I try to keep in mind how it was for those people. The straitened conditions of their travel and the physical hardships that they endured, and how young a lot of them were when they died. Of course, a lot of the car crashes and private
alcoholism,
and so on.
Yeah.
So that I get to be alive in this time and rent a nice new, club wagon or whatever from their fleet Chevy Express at Enterprise and drive on interstates and eat at Panera instead of those guys ate.
Yeah. God knows they probably had to bring their own food or something like that. I mean, I don't know what they wrote.
Pretty easy to count your blessings nowadays.
Yeah. So, what was I going to say here? Oh, I remember asking you once after a gig or Martyrs. I asked you about Guy Clark, who's one of my songwriting idols, and I don't hear much. I don't think I've ever read anything that you've written about the kind of Texas pantheon of songwriters. So Guy Clark, Townes Van Zandt, Steve Earle, Lyle Lovett, these guys who come from that lineage. Did that just music pass you by, or did you not care for it, or what?
Yeah, some of it I don't like, but two guys that I like a lot are Rodney and Guy.
Yeah.
And, whatever. I mean, taste is taste.
Yeah.
But I would say that the thing that sometimes I don't like about the Texas school is, again, the braggadocio and the I'm from Texas superiority of that. And, and I'm a poet and I'm a songwriter and I'm a snake handler and forget about it, I got to work with briefly with a guy, Wylie Hubbard, earlier this year, and he's one guy that I knew some of his music, and wasn't sure what his personality would be like. He's such a dear, pleasant person to work with that I came away a fan of him as a person, and that totally changed my relationship to his music, I would say, afterwards. So I think I could get a different handle on that form of music if I focus less on the image that they're presenting in their song, which seems attuned to a certain kind of audience and attuned to a certain kind of persona sculpture.
Yeah. I think that Guy. I mean, I don't know how much of Guy Clark's music you've listened to, but it's incredibly great. Just the craft of the songwriting is really great. And he, up till the time he died, like even his last record is just every bit as good, in some ways better than anything he did as a young man. In contrast to like all the stuff you said about Lightfoot, whereas like the youth was so much a part of the greatness. Guy Clark, when he was dying, because he got some sort of blood cancer or something, he had kind of a prolonged last few years of his life, but he was able to get out that last record. It's called My Favorite Picture of You, which is a song he wrote about just a Polaroid photo of his wife. But most of the songs on that album are just beautiful. And there's 4 or 5 of his albums which are just extraordinarily great and they pay back repeated listening.
Well, the thing about the country is that the country music, age and wisdom are so baked into it, as opposed to Gordon Lightfoot, maybe some more, mainstream commercial kinds of music.
Where youth is at a premium, beauty and whatever else. Where youth and beauty are at a premium rather than, wisdom and old age. Right.
And to me, like Guy Clark as a wise storyteller was, you could sort of buy into it when he was, 25 or 30 years old. But by the time he's 60 years old and taking that stance, it's just like really beautiful and
right. Yeah, and when he sings that song about his wife or something, it's really something. Well, we're coming to the end. Like I said, I'm getting tired. I'm curious. I'll just name the people that I wanted you to react to, and some other time we'll talk about them. So, Gillian Welch and David Rawlings, Steely Dan. I was going to kid you about Steely Dan. So I love Steely Dan and I love your music. So what's wrong with me? Because aren't you on the record as not liking Steely Dan, or is that just people trolling you, or what's the deal with you and Steely Dan?
Well, I don't exactly get it, but it's probably like beyond me. But it's funny, I was talking with a guy yesterday about this with my friend Robbie Gerso, and he was talking about how great these Michael McDonald vocal lines are on
Peg or whatever. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. He was telling me what was good about them. And it was right after we had talked about some Elvis Costello music. And I was thinking, the funny thing is, like, back in the day, because we were all teenagers when this stuff was coming out, and so it made a firm impression on us whether we liked the music or not.
Yes.
But you had the idea that, these group of kids like Steely Dan, and I'm more of an Elvis Costello kind of guy, and that's my thing, because I'm with the literate, unpopular, unlovely, angry. I'm not with the cool marijuana smoking people over there.
Hipsters.
And that's such a stupid idea, and you get older and you think, no, you don't have to choose. You
get to like both. I was talking to my brother last night. I told him I was doing this interview with you today and how excited I was. And I told him I was going to kind of bring up this issue of Steely Dan a little bit and I was speculating, why wouldn't Robbie like Steely Dan? To me, it's just such excellent music. It's beautifully composed. The lyrics are interesting. It's obviously like the absolute top flight, virtuoso performing, which I know you also appreciate. And I thought maybe it was just that the typical beef against Steely Dan is that it's sterile. It's so hermetically perfect that it's sterile. And some people are turned off by that. It has not a single rough edge. And I was speculating that's what you didn't like about it.
Well, I think a harder question is why I only James Taylor music, which I was going over with John Sternberg one time. Like Steely Dan music is to me, it's like sterile, because I was saying that Shania Twain piece, like it was interesting to me that I did like Shania Twain because it's sterile and studio created. Like, how do I even relate to this thing? It's the kind of thing that I usually can't really abide. But with James Taylor, we were talking about one time, and like similarly, very carefully crafted music, very harmonically sophisticated, educated composition, I would say.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me that with James, I'm always confronted by this picture of James himself in his music, and it's always kind of admirable and handsome. And he's in a boat in a T-shirt that looks like it costs $20, but it really costs $200. It's got a little tear in it, and he's rowing on a quiet sunset and having deep thoughts. I'm like, yeah, all right. Well, it's a brand. I want to hear a little grit and a little negativity along with that.
Interesting. So what about Little Feat and Lowell George? Little Feat was such a big band for me, and I've also never heard you make any reference to that or necessarily hear musical references to that. Were you a fan of Little Feat or of Lowell George? I know Don
records when I was a kid.
Which one do you remember?
Feet Don't Fail Me Now.
Yeah.
And I performed their songs, with different. Whereas I don't think I've ever performed a Steely Dan song, but
so maybe it was just my mistake about Little Feat. I hadn't overlapped.
I used to work with a drummer. He said, you just don't like music that grooves. He said to me one time. So maybe there's something to that. I don't know. When groove is the prominent thing, maybe it gets beyond me. I don't know. I don't think that's ridiculous. I don't think that's ridiculous. That's true at all. That doesn't jive with my sense of your music in any way. So you say in one of those articles you were going to do a collaboration with David Greer, the great virtuoso flat-picking guitar player. Did anything ever come of that? I would love to hear a Robbie Fulks, David Greer, something or other. Did you guys do anything? That tour with Jack on the Doc Watson music.
Oh, so David Greer was the other player on that gig. Right. I didn't realize that. My God, that must have been amazing.
It was super fun, yeah. And then David and I, supposedly, I don't know how the pandemic will affect it, but supposedly my next record was a bluegrass record, and I've got dates booked for it in October to record, and David said he'd help me out some with that. So hopefully he'll be on my next record, and I think it might be a duo thing, wow. I'll put myself up there on the level with him, but it's fun. Again, the duo thing, it's just fun to rip off a guy that's that great.
He is frighteningly great. That record of his, I Have the House to Myself.
That's my favorite record of his. I was telling that.
It's absolutely incredible. It is. So there's nothing he's done that even comes close to that. He's done some interesting stuff with other players, but I've Got My House to Myself. Just, I think every other guitar player, including Brian Sutton, who I know you're an admirer of, no one can touch what David Greer can do. His inventiveness, his imagination,
they're all great, but nobody made a solo guitar record like that.
That thing, it really set the mold ever since. And not enough people know that record, I don't think. Okay, a couple very deep
that record, I used to listen to it almost every day during that year that I was in New York and up against that wall. Yeah. And it's just the way that David, like a lot of bluegrass guitar players, he plays a lot of stuff out of the G shape, Yeah. And for me, just hearing the way that he would go, like he would get up to that fifth, like on the Gold Rush.
Yeah.
But just the sound of, to me, you could reduce all of his playing to just that fifth, and it would be great.
He can do the cross picking like none other. He could do seemingly endless melodic variations across the whole range of the guitar. He's just an absolute master. When I also have listened to that record many, 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 many times, and sometimes it's almost too much for me. I can't. Like my brain has to be ready to absorb all those ideas at once. Sometimes I need something where I can tune out a little bit, but if he's playing that stuff, this is just absolutely incredible. Okay, where do I go? So you make a comparison at one point between playing music and religious devotion. You remember that? Mm-hmm. I didn't give myself references to each of these essays. I thought the idea was that like the level of commitment that was required of both. This was either
money too much, right?
neither one do you make very much money. I thought it had something to do with spiritual commitment too.
I think so.
Yeah. What was I going to say?
Yeah, I think if you're not tied into that idea of, I did a record once when I was like 34 maybe, or 5. and I had a producer, and he was a crazy guy. His name was Rick Will, and my band would play a song, and he'd be jumping on the chairs and yelling at us, 14, 14. He kept saying like 14 because we weren't playing enough like we were 14 years old.
Oh.
And to me, that hints at the religious idea, you like
childlike.
Yeah, like keeping the sense of joy and discovery and keeping yourself tuned to that way that you first felt when you fell in love. Like when you get out of that and it begins to be a grind and you get to time to make another record, time to do another show. Like that's the enemy of the musical instinct.
And yet it is your job. Like early on, there was a couple of questions about songwriting I didn't ask you, but I remember reading in like that Songwriters on Songwriting book, the different routines that these songwriters have. And someone like John Hyatt, who's a huge influence of mine, someone whose songwriting I admire so much, at least at some point in his life, he said he approached it very much like a job. I think he had a publishing gig also where he had to literally show up at one of these Nashville places and write songs, but also for his own music, he spends a certain number of hours, going to a certain place and pushing himself to write songs every day or 5 days a week or something like that. So you must, when you talk about, you wrote that essay where you went on tour with Noam Pekelny and those other guys this last year and these great virtuosos. And you said something like, I can never, like you said, I observe them and they play like from the minute they get up in the morning to the minute they go to bed at night. And that's how they become these virtuosos. But you said you can't. You have to write songs. So that implied to me that you were spending some time almost every day writing songs. Is that right?
Yeah, I found it as a real trade-off because I want to do both. Like I'm equally interested in more in having written songs than in writing songs, but in being a songwriter and being a player. And that doesn't describe a ton of people probably. I think I'm different from most people in that respect. Like they're really equally valuable to me. And so, yeah, to be a great player, you should have, 6 hours of the day to devote to playing and not just performance, but goofing around and bring up your fingers and letting your mind run wild and doing exercise, learning new songs. Yeah. And then to be a good songwriter, similar, you want to spend 6 hours a day doing that. So you can't do both. And, and you also can't get the momentum build up, unfortunately. So I haven't found a good answer to that. I asked Bruce Molsky about just he's so good on different instruments. Like, how do you apportion your time? And he didn't have a very satisfactory answer. And I don't either to this songwriting versus playing, except, like I need to have a record written 3 or 4 months from now. So I'm going to be doing pretty much all that for the next 3 or 4 months. Or I don't have anything that needs to be written, so I'm going to just dive into the guitar for a while.
Playing. I asked our mutual friend Kurt Morrison. I said I'm going to be interviewing Robbie. What should I ask him? And Kurt just wrote back, "How does he do it? Ask him how he does it." And his point was, how can you be such a good guitar player? You can front a band, an electric band, an acoustic band. You can play these duets. You can do solo singer-songwriting. You write these amazing songs. So I don't think that you have an answer to that question, but that's like you asking these instrumentalists, like John Rice, how does he play everything with strings, right? He can play, I'm not sure John plays the pedal steel. Maybe that's the one thing he doesn't play.
Well, John's single and his kid lives in Canada, I guess, still, right? So, so he has time that a guy with, 6 kids running around the house presumably doesn't have. And in my case, now that my kids are grown, and, my oldest is 36 and the youngest is 20 and out of the house. And so for the last couple of years, I've had the benefit really since my 2 youngest have been teenagers, which has been for the last, 5, 6, 7 years. And I've really been able to use it as an opportunity for more hours during the day. And on top of that, I have a wife that, that doesn't have a super hard work schedule in terms of time, but does make a good income and all this stuff, like just a great opportunity for me to, rather than sit around, drink beer and watch streaming TV. Yeah. That's the area that I don't know anything about where the time comes from. Never watched The Sopranos. Never watched.
I mean, I've spent probably too much time doing that. Not as much as some, less than others. But there's some good stuff there. Like Deadwood. The writing on Deadwood is just amazing.
Yeah.
But what you've done, I'm glad you spent the time doing what you've done because you produced all this amazing art.
Well, you and 8,000 other people are very happy that I did that.
One final question. So in my writing, I think a lot about illness. I work in the health context, and I think a lot about illness and how people cope with illness and so on. And there's a concept of self-transcendence that sometimes at the even with a serious illness or at the end of your life, people can experience this self-transcendence, some sort of transcending above their own ego. And this allows them to look back on their life with some sense of satisfaction and have kind of a good death, right? And this is also a theme in spiritual thinking, right? So in Buddhism and in meditation, there's this idea of letting go of the ego, transcending the self. And I just, I'm spiritually moved by your music. I can have a self-transcendent experience when I'm walking at night in the cool air and have your music in my headphones. I'm deeply moved in this way, which I stop thinking about myself and I'm thinking about the characters in the songs, or I'm just letting myself be carried away or something. So what do you make of this notion of self-transcendence in music or in art?
Well, I'm very gratified to hear you say that, and that's just such a great thing to hear. First of all, I think the self is a trap, and to get to that point where you're having a happy death, where you feel that you've lived your life decently well, is obviously that you don't get to that point between the time that you get the cancer diagnosis and the time that you die, within those few months or whatever. Right. It's just something that we have to keep working toward and thinking about for our whole lives, that the fact that it's going to come to an end point, that we don't know what the end point is, and that we have to work on making meaning and out of our lives and putting some kind of a joy into it, and working past the great setbacks that are incorporated into all of our lives. So for me, the self-centeredness is that's always been a problem for me, and the problem that I can find myself a prisoner of my own brain, my own thoughts, my own emotions. They can just totally master me. And but there again, we're all in the same boat, and to get that out in the open and to help each other deal with that is one of the best ways I think that we can use our time.
But hasn't music given catharsis to some of that or not? I mean, this feeling of you being, obviously your music is very self-reflective and autobiographical in some ways, but has music been a release from that? From this, I have some stuff where you talk about the self, I can't, I'll just start with that question. So has music been a release from this kind of the confines of so you said the self is a trap, is either writing or playing a way out of that?
I'm not sure about the writing, because I always experienced the writing as kind of unpleasurable. For me, it's hard, and it's a lot of redrafting and for instance, if you're writing a gloomy murder ballad and it takes you 3 weeks, then you're spending 3 weeks inside the head of somebody that you don't want to be really hanging out with. And it's just got a lot of like nuts and bolts, I guess, building a bookcase can be, or building something as a carpenter could be as pleasurable in a way, but for me, it's always more pleasurable having finished it and looking at the finished object. So performing a song is pleasurable, and playing on the guitar are pleasurable, maybe cathartic, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But generally, more pleasure and catharsis, I think, for me, come in playing other people's music, playing a Doc Watson song, or sitting down and enjoying a Doc Watson song on the record player, or, taking in stuff that other people have written and not just bathing in my own thoughts. There's really limited interest for me in that.
I get you. I mean, when you play someone else's songs, like when I play one of your songs, I'm very enamored of Fairly Well Carolina Gals. This is a song I'll link to in the description below. It's such a beautiful song, and I play it, and I'm just transported by it. There's a couple lines in there. There's one line, and it would prove how close in age and life experience we are. So you say, I was just a kid about yay tall, sniffing that glue at the Northgate Mall. And people our age, I mean, I related to that exactly. For me, it wasn't the Northgate Mall. It was the Deerbrook Mall, but I was down there sniffing that Tester's glue with those models. I mean, it was so directly relatable to me, which probably people younger than us just have absolutely no idea what that line was about.
You hear these weird stories about, well, you get this aerosol product, you put this piece of this
you can huff it
or something over it, and you get rid of most of it, but not all of it, and then you tilt your head. It's like this crazy urban mythology.
Yeah, no, we're not promoting huffing here on this video, but the sniffing that glue at the Northgate Mall was an image that I knew that was a true song. All right, Robbie, I've gotten through the vast majority of my questions. Thanks so much for talking with me. Thanks for all the songs. They've brought me so much joy, and I just appreciate. And I know that from listening to them that you could just sense what it took out of you, to produce them. And I also know the life of a performing artist.
Anymore, right? Like,
but the life of a performer, I mean, you make sacrifices to be an artist, and people like me, I'm a college professor, but I benefit from the sacrifices that you made. So I'm really grateful for it.
Well, I've never had so much fun, hardly, as here. Next lifetime I'll trade places with you. How about?
Sweetest Sweet Comes. Where does that come from in the middle of Upland Stories? It's at first I was just like a Motown song. That's not exactly the right description, but it has like this slight R&B feel. There's like a frailing banjo tune with, America is a Hard Religion. And then there's Sweetest Sweet Comes. It's just striking.
Yeah, there was a lot of heavy, melancholy material on that record and socio-political comments. So yeah. I think that I thought I'd better have a love song to kind of break up the monotony of the heaviness.
Gorgeous. And the keyboard solo, who played keyboard on that song?
Well, Wayne Horvitz did. Yeah, he's great.
The keyboard solo is so perfect. And then your guitar solo that ends the tune.
Oh, thank you.
Really, really remarkable. So, ladies and gentlemen, Robbie Fulks, the great American singer-songwriter. I'll put a bunch of links down in the description if you want to check out his music, including, you just go to robbiefulks.com, right? And that's Robbie's website where you can get his merchandise and his other material. There's a ton of Robbie on YouTube as well, but he doesn't get paid unless you go and buy it from him. So thanks a million, Robbie. I'm glad you're well. Thanks for spending this time with me. I'm really grateful for it.
Thanks, Bruce.
Okay. Bye, Robbie. Take care.
All right. Talk to you soon, I hope.
When we did our interview, Robbie wasn't set up for performing and recording. We were just using the internal mic on his laptop. But the next day, he was able to set up to record a performance for me. And he recorded a performance of one of my favorite songs of his from the album Revenge of the Dobermans. It's a song called Old Glories.
This song called Old Glories. Closing the west end, howling up at the stars. Jumping the turnstile, smoking between the cars. Feeling was all that we lived for. Now was the only time. Back when now was 1979. Yeah, the fast lane was my first love, I confess. But this cruising along ain't too bad, second best. I ain't chasing the next thrill, not making no girls' heads turn. I'm not setting the world on fire, no, I'm just watching it burn. Old glory. that's what gets me by. I can always bring back a few if I try, really try. Oh, it's sweet to remember when the world was in its prime. Oh, glories, getting older all of the time. There's a cassette sits for way back on the shelf. Yes, I get a secret kick from my long-haired self. Me and Billy used to sing like brothers. Yeah, we still talk once in a while. He thinks one last reunion show would sure give those old fans a smile. Old glories, yeah, that's what gets me by. I can always bring back a few if I try, really try. Oh, it's sweet to remember when the world was in its prime. Old glories, getting older all of the time. These are stories I don't tell the kids. They don't walk the same path I did, God forbid. Never drove drunk into a river, never dreamed of dying for love. Stared half the night out the window, lost in a neverland of old glories, that's what gets me by. I can always bring back a few if I try, really try. Oh, it's sweet to remember when the world was in its prime. Oh, glories, oh, glories, getting older